Good evening and welcome to Insight. Tonight we're dealing with an upsetting issue, one highlighted by the recent sentencing of architect Ian McGill. He collected photos on his computer, but no ordinary photos. And when his case came to court, some of the details were so horrific, the judge was told that they couldn't even be described. But Ian McGill was sentenced to only 2 years in jail and literally could be free within months. That's caused outrage. We'll be discussing his case in a few minutes, but how extensive is internet crime and how do we deal with those who trade in such images? The child is up there often, connecting with the world. Your child, your neighbour's child, your grandchild maybe, all fairly innocent. But maybe not so. Maybe these are just mementos from a young, innocent life about to be shelved. A new internet friend wants to set up a meeting. But is it a friend? Or maybe it's someone who knows how to manipulate an internet friendship. Someone in a growing community of sex criminals using the internet, from grooming to trading in indecent images. Someone like this.
Ian McGill is wired in a certain way. Ian McGill does have a preference for younger children.
59-year-old McGill was arrested earlier this year. He's from Downpatrick, a known predator with 2 previous convictions. After his second one in 1995, he admitted, "I realise that I have to be punished for what I've done. I've lived with these inclinations for the whole of my life." McGill's self-pity rang hollow. 7 years after that, he headed for a holiday in Thailand to the back alleys of Bangkok. He paid a Thai mother £155 to take posed photos of her 4 naked children. Police found those photos on his computer when they picked him up a few months ago. They also found more than 15,000 other images of children, including more than 2,000 in the 2 most appalling categories.
Level 4 covers things like child rape, and level 5 covers things like sadomasochism. So we're talking about horrific, very horrific images here. It's not child pornography. It's not something that the child is paid to do or is done for pleasure. This is child sexual abuse. This quite often is violent sexual abuse of a child.
McGill received a 4-year sentence, 2 years in custody and 2 on probation. And that did not go down well with certain people and agencies, among them the Nexus Institute here, which counsels victims of sexual abuse. Chris Smallwoods is the regional manager of Nexus.
When I saw the sentence, I was absolutely appalled. We made it very clear that the sentence that handed out was paltry. When you look at McGill's case in particular, as you've described, he offended twice in the 1990s. He was sentenced for those. He then travels far and wide. Now, we know about Thailand. What we don't know about is what else has he done. I'm led to believe now the sentence he could have got was 10 years. So from our organisation's aspect, we have done, and we will continue to ask, why was he not given the maximum sentence? To us, this man is a high risk. His defence that he's not a risk to the community, of course he is.
And McGill isn't the only one. The most recent statistics list some 700 people as registered sex offenders in Northern Ireland, 48 of them high risk. 9 offenders have records that indicate a specific risk toward children, but police believe that less than a third of victims report sexual assaults. And if they do, it's often many years later. This little girl was one of those victims.
My whole childhood revolved around being abused by different perpetrators. I stopped counting because it just got to the stage where it really didn't matter how many there were. It was how I was feeling because of it. I was gang raped when I was 14. I never told anybody because I felt to blame. I felt I shouldn't have been there. I had run away from home. My life was just, I didn't have a life. I lived my life just feeling dirty, useless, worthless, unloved, unwanted. I was like a shell.
Just a couple of photo images, but photographs have lost some of their own innocence in the world of the internet.
survivors now are more inclined to raise the fear that their images of themselves as children are actually out there somewhere, and who's looking at them and where they're going. That would be a major concern now, which it wouldn't have been, as I said, I've been doing this job for 21 years. It wouldn't have been 15 years ago, 10 years, 5 years in particular. People are now raising it. I remember he had a camera, I remember he had this or that.
The victims have another concern as well. What happens when the predators are caught, sentenced, and then released into the community at some point?
When the judge makes a stipulation, for example, that he mustn't have access to a computer, that's where the question mark sits. How can that effectively be monitored?
There's a new government agency named CEOP, which deals directly with that question. CEOP stands for Child Exploitation and Online Protection. It recently took part in smashing a global network of child sex offenders working online. It has a direct interest in keeping track of predators when they're back on the street.
Of course it can be effectively monitored. They represent a risk. You've got to moderate and mitigate that risk with the threat of a real consequence. So routine surveillance of them should be applied. Which cafes are they going to? Where are they going now? Are they going to internet cafes? Is there a computer in their house? Those are all things within the gift, of the police service, to ask those questions and to follow up.
My name is Clark Coates. I'm from the Magherafelt Neighbourhood Policing Team.
CEOP is also the guiding agency behind a new programme to train young people in the teaching of internet safety. This seminar is run at Magherafelt by police and the North East Education and Library Board. Constable Coates offers practical advice for the trainees to pass on to students.
You've got to stress to them that they have taken certain precautions before they'll go and meet anyone who they've only ever met online before. It'll teach them how to protect themselves, protect their own personal information, and prevent them getting into situations where they may be out of their depth or worse.
Children do not know who they're talking to. Children are vulnerable. They believe anything. You could be talking to a 50-year-old man who's telling you he's a 13-year-old school child, and it has been done. It's just another way for perpetrators to muscle in on children.
The computer's busy again tonight. Maybe there's homework to do or a tempting video game. Or maybe there's someone out there on the internet, someone who's prohibited from using a computer, but who wants to make a new young friend. Now, joining us to discuss some of the fallout from the case, as well as how you deal with those involved in this type of internet crime, are University of Ulster lecturer Rosemary Craig, who has taken a specific interest in the McGill case, Julianne Boyle, who's suffered childhood sexual abuse, and Willie McCauley, who coordinates the risk assessment and management of sex offenders. That multi-agency strategy is called the Masram process. But by definition, the internet's relatively new. It's introducing new criminals and many unidentified victims. So, by definition again, we don't know the true extent of this, do we?
Probably not. The internet is huge, and the problems that the internet present in terms of criminal justice, particularly sexual offending, is huge. There are messages coming through now about the dangers that it presents, particularly to children. But you're right, no, we don't know, I think, fully yet what the internet actually poses as concerning risk.
So the mechanisms, Rosemary Craig, that we're putting into place around this, we don't know if they're going to be satisfactory or not, because we don't know the scale of the problem.
No, we don't know the scale of the problem, and I think it would be very difficult to police whether someone has a mobile phone or whether someone has access to a computer, because it's too easy for anyone to go into an internet cafe or a university or anywhere for that matter and access computers. That would be my concern, I have to say.
Now, over the weekend, we've been talking to Jim Gamble from the CEOP organisation, and this is what he has to say about the mechanisms that they put in place for trying to identify those who are responsible.
We deploy our officers online, some masquerading as children, some masquerading as like-minded paedophiles, and we operate in those areas of the internet where we have received reports that paedophiles are active. And what we do is we reach into that, internet environment to identify individuals who represent a risk, and then we lure them from the technical environment to the real world where we can arrest them.
Now, McGill was known to the police, but even in that time, between his previous convictions and now, he was gathering huge amounts of information, and each one of those potentially is another victim.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, that's the worst about the internet. The internet creates an environment now for a demand for more victims in relation to sexual assault.
And each time, Julianne, it re-victimises the victim every time it goes up and gets sold on.
Well, we have to acknowledge that this is child abuse. This is not, these are children that are being abused online and downloaded, and it is child abuse. And that would be the first message that people need to be, distinguish from what it is. It's not just talking to a paedophile online, it's child abuse. McGill downloaded child pornography. And the images that he done, these are children in the exploited that don't understand, you know, at a very young age being a victim to go into later life. I mean, 25 years ago, my whole world was turned upside down by my perpetrators, and it has taken me 25 years now to speak out for other victims and breaking the silence.
Yes, you've hinted at why you're here, but can you explain that more fully, perhaps? You know, traditionally,
I was at the age of 11, I was abused, and again at the age of 13 by 2 different perpetrators, also reoffended by.
And why do you want to come on and be public about what happened?
Like I say, it's breaking the silence, and it's letting children see and people see that no is no, and you know, come out. And we live under that, you know, life of not being able to. I didn't know who I was. He took away my right to say no. He took my right away of my life, and the same things that are happening to children online. You know, that's the reason why I spoke out.
Rosemary Craig, justice must be done and seen to be done. And in this case, we understand that the judge was correct with the sentence that he handed out. But given what I've just said, the court of public opinion, though, must be satisfied too.
Well, I think one of the things that's exercising the minds of people in Northern Ireland, of course, is I think we're the only country in the world that has 50% remission. It doesn't have to be earned, it's given automatically. That was given 18 years ago. The government then, a few years later, removed 50% remission, but only from scheduled offenders. That would be terrorist type offenders. Sex offenders do not come under scheduled offenders. A few years later, the government then reinstated the 50% remission to the scheduled offenders. Now, I don't think until quite recently there has been as much talk and acknowledgement about sex offending and abuse. It seems to have come to the fore, I think, from the ceasing of the Troubles.
Yeah. Well, let's just look at this whole business of 50% remission, because the government did say it would rule it out, but it hasn't in the latest legislation proposals.
Well, the legislation effectively in relation to dangerous offenders in Part 2 of the new draft Criminal Justice Northern Ireland Order will effectively remove the potential for 50% remission in relation to sex offenders.
How does it do that?
Because it creates 3 new menus of sentences for the judiciary in relation to these particular group of offenders under the heading of dangerous offenders, which will not just be sex offenders but also include violent offenders as well, so that a judge will have in those tariffs the opportunity to sentence somebody to an indeterminate sentence, to a sentence that is extended and will include a full requirement to serve the period of time in prison that's applied to that case, and also a period in time in
But surely won't there also be, you know, pressures on the prison system? And in that light, they may also release them. I mean, there's no guarantees they're going to keep them in.
Well, in preparation for the Criminal Justice Order, the Northern Ireland Office have taken cognizance of the potential increase. There isn't a huge increase in relation to the sex offender group itself. The sex offender population in the prisons in Northern Ireland would usually sit around about 10%. There isn't an expectation that that would increase hugely. It will obviously increase some of the resource implications, but not massively.
And from a victim's or a survivor's perspective, is the way you describe it, do you want to see the key thrown away?
Well, we would like to see indeterminate sentences put on to all of them, because the way we see it is when does a lower crime become a bigger crime? You know, these men go on and the people that would come through our centre, and the survivors of justice groups that we have set up within the Rape Crisis Centre, could tell you that they go from from the lower to the higher risk, because they learn. They're not put in prisons and they're not rehabilitated in there. They're let out to commit these crimes, and it has been shown. And I would like to say that.
I think what you're saying is that sex offenders at the moment are not engaging in the programmes. They are not engaging in the sex offenders treatment programme. They're not engaging in anger management.
Exactly.
And the reason for that, of course, is because many of them do not admit to their crime, plead not guilty, and then they're found guilty. They then are supposed to undertake the courses in the prison, and because they are appealing their sentence, their argument is that if we do the courses, we're saying we're guilty. And so they are coming out of the prisons exactly the same as they went in.
Their human rights, you know, they're looking at the human rights aspect of it in prison.
Yes,
my human rights was taken away. I didn't get that. You know, these should be compulsory within the judicial system itself, that these men should set these programmes. Men and women who commit these crimes should do these programmes.
And of course, the other important thing is from a victim's perspective. They've got to see the victim's perspective, never mind the wider court of public opinion. They must see that the sentences are proportionate to what the crime is, and that they're carried through.
We've asked, you know, for, you know, the 50% remission to be taken off. We are the only place in England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland only has the 50% remission. They're here. It should not be there. We were told by our government, that 50% remission would be taken off months ago at the Track to Harm case. Never happened. It's not written in stone. The 50% remission be taken off. It took another, the likes of McGill, before anybody's listening, even as survivors, and we're crying out, you know, for indeterminate sentence, panelling, you know, victim impact reports are already in. They're good, and be known that your perpetrator has been released into society again.
Yes, and attached to that is a whole management process that the government has put in place around those who have perpetrated such crimes. And here's what Jim Gamble has to say about the whole idea of rehabilitation.
No hope is the answer for those that will threaten to hurt them, so they better go and engage with law enforcement, hand themselves in. And I'm not suggesting that sex offenders can be rehabilitated. That's the difficulty. I don't believe they can. I believe the only way we can manage them, and I'm saying manage, not treat, because people use the emotive language they want if they want to soften or harden your argument, is through the threat of a real consequence, that they will be caught and they will be punished. So that's why I say no hope whatsoever. If you're going to hurt children, you have no hope. We will catch you.
So what's the best way of dealing with sex offenders, and will they ultimately catch them?
Well, I'm not really sure, Fergal. I am concerned. I'm concerned over Trevor Hamilton, who murdered Attract to Haran. I was concerned at when Foley was going to be released, who actually raped, and then the old lady died. And that's really quite recently he was supposed to be released. And then the Ian McGill case. Now, I know for a fact, I have spoken to some police officers who were involved in that case, who were traumatised. Police officers who were traumatised by some of the pictures they had to trawl through. Now, that really, really worries me as to how we are going to treat people who have plumbed that depths.
And of course, the reality is that Ian McGill had 2 previous convictions he was known about. And he didn't collect 1 or 2 or 100 or 1,000, but 15,229. It's on an industrial scale. And yet, he still get away with it. So, he's not here to defend that particular statement, but can we really say that they ultimately will get caught?
Well, certainly the measures that are being put in place in relation to the internet raise greater potential for those people who use that method of offending to be caught. And Jim Gamble's perfectly right. The technology that the police have available to them now is much more in advance than what people would have had in relation to hands-on offending. I think we've got to realise that, as was said at the head of the programme, that the vast majority of sex offending goes unreported to the criminal justice system. We have to ask the reason for that. Are we dealing with a public health problem, and a public health problem that needs a solution that's based within the community? And I believe we have. We have a problem that is within society, that's within our community, and the criminal justice system does not have the solution to that. The criminal justice system may be able to assist in providing a solution, but it doesn't have the ultimate solution.
So what should we do?
I think society needs to waken up to the fact that this is a reality within communities. There is a quote from a victim of sexual assault in one of her books that says that evil is always human. It sits at our tables and it lies on our beds, and I think that's correct. And people have to realise that sex offenders are right throughout the community. They're in our homes, they're our brothers, they're our fathers, they're our relations, and that's where the big danger actually lies.
Julianne was nodding vigorously earlier on whenever Jim Gamble was speaking, saying that they can't be rehabilitated.
Yeah,
they
cannot be rehabilitated.
So, against that backdrop,
they learn they learn and progress, and progress into more secretive, darker ways that they're not going to get caught. And a lot of children that have been abused will not come out until they're adults, and break the silence until they're adults.
And then there were virtual hoots when the judge said that McGill wasn't allowed to have a computer. Now, how do you police that? And we heard that in the package.
Yeah, well, without talking about specific cases, there are measures available to the judiciary to enforce those through sexual offence prevention orders and so on, that give powers to the police to police through monitoring. And when you go on the internet, you have to use an ISP, you have to use credit cards and so on to access the internet, and those are opportunities then for the police to identify whether somebody is breaching. And if you breach a sexual offence prevention order, you're liable to a further 5 years imprisonment. So there are heavy penalties for breaches of those orders.
Taking nothing away, but we have been told by the system that the police, PSNI, don't have the resources, they don't have the manpower, they don't have the money. Who does? Somebody has to be accountable for no longer destroying any more children's lives. And there has to be a system that should be in power solely to help children.
And isn't the reality, the scale of his image gathering between his previous offence and now shows the flaws in the system?
Yeah, well, I think there are more factors that have to be taken into account than just numbers in relation to gathering of images. There are people with very small numbers of images who, whenever you carry out a full risk assessment, actually pose
It's child abuse.
Yes, I totally agree. It's
Whether
child abuse.
Whether it be a small minimum of a person downloading something, it's child abuse. He's downloading child abuse. Whether it went from that scale to
yes, I totally
a bigger
agree.
scale.
Yeah.
Listen, we're out of time. Thanks to our guests and to you at home for watching. Remember, if you're in any way affected by the issues that we've been discussing tonight, there are organisations who can help, and we've set up a separate web page on our internet site at u.tv where all the contact details are available. Thanks again for watching. Good night.